Hi, Brad Tonini here, and welcome to How to Seal the Deal, how to close more business more often for more money. This is a members only webinar, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you a maximum 30 minutes. I like to keep all the webinars nice and tight so that we can actually get back to the information. You'll have all the PowerPoint and everything else with it, so you can go back over and over again. So if this is the first time you've been on a webinar as a members webinar, welcome. If you've been on many of these with me before, you'll know that it's full of content. Lots of information you can use straight away in your business to be able to make sure that we make more sales. Essentially, as a trusted advisor, I'm all about how we create more opportunities in the market, but also how we close them in a way that is all about trust, integrity, reputation, and building long-term relationships. So I hope you enjoy this webinar. It's going to be, as I said, short and sharp. And if you're there with a glass of wine and some cheese, by all means, do it that way if you'd like to. If you're here in your work environment, I won't be offended if you are doing other things at the same time, simply because it's about that little pearl of wisdom that sometimes I get from being on webinars, and the same thing with you, that perhaps being with me today, you'll go, wow, I got that little idea. So let's get stuck into the information today. I want to share my screen with you and make sure that you've got the PowerPoint ready to go. So this is the screen, and I'll make myself a little bit less obvious there so that you can actually watch the actual screen in terms of what we're going to cover today. As I said, our topic is all about how to seal the deal. And one of the things that I often say to people when it comes to sealing the deal is that what's the worst thing that can happen? It's funny, as trusted advisors, I think that sometimes we get so wound up in how our buyer will react to us asking for the business that we don't do it often enough. Now, you might find yourself a person who is nervous about actually asking or confirming the business. I say, what is the worst thing that can happen? Someone will just basically say, no, right, not that I want to go ahead with it right now. And my standard answer to that is that no for now or no forever. And perhaps someone's going to say to you, that's not a problem. It's not no forever. It's just that I can't say yes to you right now. So how do we make sure that we really put a high priority on this idea of closing business or confirming business? Well, I think we need to ask for the business. The reason why is because good business is only good business when it is confirmed and paid for. Now, when I had my own business many years ago with a staff of around 27 and about 7 of us in the sales team, including myself, and we used to have an executive diary and promotional product business, as some of you would know. I used to hear all the time in the sales team, oh, yes, got that confirmed, boss. Yes, it's all going ahead. Yes, absolutely. They'll be going ahead with us. And I used to ask that question over and over again, well, show me the order. Show me confirmed and show me that they've paid a deposit, because essentially it really isn't confirmed business until they've put down money and they've made sure that they're going to go ahead. So where's our deposit? And is it confirmed? And let's make sure we get that across the line and not just talk about it. What gets in the way to us closing more business is really something that I like to discuss in all of my workshops. And I think that what happens is that we get absolutely wound up in what I call the event of closing the business. It doesn't have to be an event. It's just part of a process. It just means that as we're going along and talking with someone about doing the business together or confirming or working together, that we are moving that prospect or buyer closer and closer to the idea of doing work together and not necessarily building it up to be this big event. A lot of people get wet and clammy in their hands or dry in the throat because they know that the big closing line is about to happen. And so I need to build it up in my mind that this is an event, and it's not what it's all about at all. It's just simply that we are trying to confirm business together and that we can work together and don't build it up to be more than what it is. Now, one of the things I see a lot in the market is that salespeople think that letting the email do the talking for them is a closing technique. And essentially, that's not how we close the business. I think a lot of the ways that we do this is too passive. Closing the business in old language, as I would call it, closing rather than confirming the business, is that it's a people sport. And you can't do this just by email. Yeah, sure, you'll fluke some. You'll get people who will go ahead and everything else, and they'll say, yep, that's fine. But you really want to be face-to-face with people in the market, buyers, to be able to get their engagement levels up and also look into the white of their eyes and decide whether or not you think that person will actually go ahead with you. So I think it's a people sport. Now, as a people sport, we don't have to come across as being someone who's madly enthusiastic and pushy and cheesy or schmaltzy, but we do actually have to have what I believe is a little bit of confidence. See, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are right. Closing the business is all about our confidence to be able to ask someone for the business, to ask someone if they'd be happy to move ahead to the next stage. Now, you can do that in such a way that it can be a bit assumptive, but what's the worst thing that's going to happen? The person's going to say, no, not for now. And so they go into a pipeline, into a nurture sequence, and you come back around and you ask them again down the track. But it is a confidence game. And so many people in sales may from time to time lack the self-esteem or the self-confidence to just simply ask for the business. So if you're not making as many sales as you'd like to in sales, and you're constantly seeing a lot of people in your pipeline that are not necessarily going ahead with you, chances are it's just because you're not actually asking the question and not having this what's the worst thing that can happen type approach to selling. Now, I believe that there are really 4 keys to sealing the deal, which I'd like to talk about today. And the first one is that selling and asking for the business is all about process and not an event. I don't believe that closing the business has to be this big event that we build up in our own mind. It's just simply a process. And what I mean by that is that it starts with one thing that's really important, and that is what I call closing acuity. Now, acuity meaning awareness. How do we build in our mind great acuity in dealing with our buyer? So having great acuity means that you are noticing in front of you a person who is reasonably engaged with you. They're asking questions and they're giving out what they would call in old terminology buying signals. Now, what are buying signals? Well, things like people making notes when you're actually saying, mounting your case and talking about your products, them engaged in really good questions, asking you anything that really is about the future of the transaction. In other words, into the future, if we were to do business, could you deliver by this time or that time? It could be doodling in terms of, making notes about what you're talking about, not doodling for the sake of just not being aware, but I mean doodling about, some of the numbers you're giving or some of the solutions you're giving. By the way, don't make rash assumptions like I have in sales, where because someone's making notes on a pad, or doodling on a pad that they're not listening. I see this all the time in classrooms too, where people are actually doodling away, but it's not necessarily because they're not listening. It's just because it's the way they like to pass the time while you're actually discussing things. So it could be a whole range of things. They could be leaning forward and looking like they are much more engaged in terms of their pupils more dilated. There's a whole range of things you can read about online with regard to buying signals. But essentially, I think you have to have really good closing acuity, where you're picking up on what people are asking you, and you're very aware of the fact that they are engaged in your conversation. And the way that we become much more, having a higher level of acuity to our buyers, is that we are curious, we are gracious and unambiguous. Now, as a good salesperson, as a trusted advisor, you're trying to build a process. And with this process, you are being much more curious of what your buyer is saying and about their circumstances. You're always going into this conversation with a buyer with a much more open mind and loaded up with great questions. What I mean by that is you're asking intelligent questions to the buyer about the impact of the decision they're making right then. You're also being gracious in terms of if they don't go ahead with you, that's okay. You can put them in a nurture sequence. They might come and buy from you later on anyway. But, let's not be so competitive in the market that we lose our ability to be able to be gracious with our buyer. The third piece is being unambiguous. In other words, being really clear with what we're asking. At the end of the day, if we're clear in terms of our solution, clear in terms of the way that we can help our buyer, chances are they will then want to do business with us. So being unambiguous. So this whole idea of a process, not an event, and building up good acuity means that we've got to earn the right to be able to ask for the business in the first place. I see a lot of people when I coach in the field asking business when it's really not there to be asked for. In other words, you haven't built the trust yet. You haven't built the conversation yet. You haven't developed great rapport. You haven't built the ability to get along. And so when you ask for the question or ask for the business and you're not at that point, you're going to find that a lot of times you can get a pretty negative response. So when I talk about asking for the business and earning the right, I mean a number of different things. Number one is doing preparation in advance to lower their resistance and develop rapport. What have you done to be able to lower their resistance by doing prep in advance, understanding their business, understanding their circumstances, knowing who this person is, looking up in terms of LinkedIn, their profile, things like that. Number two, a compelling message of uniqueness. In other words, your ability to talk about your reason why they should do business with you. These three pillars of uniqueness, and I talk about this in my training as part of the Institute, is how do we develop our message of uniqueness to market? Asking questions to uncover their four core drivers, and I'll talk about that in a second. Creating easy to understand options and visualizing all possible scenarios of response. So essentially, you're earning the right by doing all these things, and this is helping to build a process rather than an event around selling and closing the business. So when I talk about these four core drivers, there are four reasons why people will buy from you and four drivers that really makes you attractive to them. The first one is that you've made their life easier. In other words, you have created a solution that really makes their life easier. It just takes the thinking out of it for your buyer. The second one is that you may have lowered their costs or increased their profits. In other words, your solution is all about how you are able to reduce the cost of doing business, or in my case, to increase sales or increase their profits in business. And so if you can think about these things, then it then becomes a much more earning the right scenario for someone rather than asking for the person's business out of turn. The third one is lowering the risk. In other words, how do you lower their risk in business? Is it through a guarantee? Is it through testimonials? But you actually lower the risk. And the fourth one is how do we increase their competitive advantage in the market? Now, if you've done some homework in each of these four areas, you will be much more compelling in terms of being able to develop a great process rather than just an event in closing the business. So how do you increase their competitive advantage? Have a think for a moment how you do those four things. If you can do those four things, you will have earned the right in terms of asking for the business. Another part of this is understanding the buyer's style. Not everyone is going to buy the same way. Essentially, we know that our buyers are made up of different styles. Now, there are behavioural sort of buyers who will make buying decisions pretty quickly. They know what they want you sound like you're making a great solution for them. They're happy to go ahead, bang, and you can have a very, very quick meeting. In fact, one of the fastest meetings I ever had was a high-B behavioural buyer who basically bought from me in 12 minutes a solution that was around $26,000. Now, I tell a story in my trainings, which you'll hear in the Institute, but Mark in this situation just knew what he wanted. And I was talking the right level of interest for him. I was talking a solution that really was compelling to him, and he went ahead and bought it. So at the end of the day, how do we talk to that style? Another style might be cognitive, which is exactly the opposite. In other words, facts, but also slow in decision making. Now, they may not be able to make a decision to go ahead in that first conversation. We need to respect that, understand that, because if you push too hard, you may create irreparable damage. How about the expressive style? The person who is very outgoing, very talkative, but you find it very hard to keep them on agenda. Well, you might have to create a second meeting with that person to be able to really come back to that person with a full response, a full solution to them, because they, at that point, are not really taking everything you're talking about. And the other one is the interpersonal buyer. And what I mean by that is someone who is a little more interpersonal, being introverted style, and they need to think it over, or they need to go and ask someone about this. They may not be the person empowered to make the decision. So what I'm saying here really is we've got 4 styles of buyer, which we talk about in the Institute with our styles workshop as part of the Trusted Advisor Selling Workshop, which is part of the Institute that you've made the investment in. And at the end of the day, the styles of the buyers will determine their ability to make a decision fast. And if we don't take that into account, if we don't understand that people are different, I am absolutely sure you'll make less sales. So conversion comes back to how do we determine their styles. Now, there's a whole range of things we look for in terms of their buying styles, and I'll talk about this separately, but essentially understanding their style. So we've now earned the right to be able to ask for the business. It's a process and not an event. The second piece is watching out for the roadblocks. And people talk about these as being objections. Essentially, we know that we will get thrown off track if we're not prepared for certain objections. And there are 2 types, I think, of objections we really get. When I ask this question in workshops, people often say to me, oh, yeah, I have all these different objections. I want to think it over. I want to talk about it with someone else. I need to go and talk to the decision maker. I need to get on board, whatever it is. But essentially, I think there are 2 main types of objections we get in sales. The first one is, help me make this work for me objections. In other words, there's a genuine objections where you actually have not yet got the buyer across the line simply because you've not mounted a really solid argument. The second type of objections is that I don't want to buy from you, but I just can't tell you objections. And what I mean by that is that people just are really courteous and they go, oh, you need to think about it. Yeah, I'll come back to you next week. And they really have no real intention to buy from you at all. And we don't pick up on this. And so a good salesperson, a good trusted advisor will actually understand this in terms of being these 2 main types of objections. So let's talk about objection number 1. Objection number 1, help me to help you, or help me to understand your solution objections, are really made up of these 4 things. They're much more specific. In other words, do you have my actual size? Can you reach within this budget, etc.? They may be a more positive objection. I'd really like to try to get this done. I'd like to move ahead. So you feel like there's an integrity there. They'll be welcoming of your response or your answer. In other words, they're really listening to what you're saying. And there's a genuine interest to buy or evaluate. So what we're trying to find out is whether the person is actually genuinely interested in what we're talking about. A type 2 objection is, I don't want to buy from you, but I just haven't got the guts to tell you objection. And they're more vague, more quantifiable. In other words, not quantifiable. They really don't have a specific type of objection, but they're vague about, oh, I just need to think about it, that sort of thing. And you really don't pick up on the fact that they're actually involved in the conversation. If you deal with an objection, they'll probably bring up another one, by the way. They'll be thinking about another way of smoke screening the whole thing. And once they leave you, they'll go to fog. In other words, that fog where you can't get them back. They're gone. You try to email them, phone them, they never respond. They simply hate confrontation or to disappoint you. So really what we're trying to do is to find out, are they a type 1 or a type 2? And we've got to keep asking questions to find out the level of commitment. And at the end of the day, if we can determine this, it makes a massive difference in terms of our success rate. Essentially, they used to say in selling that it's all about no need, no money, no authority as being the three main things that really are the determinants of someone not going ahead. A genuine objection. And I think if someone has no need for what you've got to offer and don't have a budget for it and certainly can't make a decision, these are genuine things that we need to be taking into account. So at the end of the day, we're looking out for what we call lowering resistance language. We're trying to find a way of asking our buyer, where do we go from here? And there may be a number of different things we can ask at this point, but what happens now? Where do we go from here? What do you need to do next might be a way in which we could ask you. So what would you like to do, or what would you like me to do? And so where would you like to go from here? These are all ways in which we try to lower resistance to get our buyer to on the same page with us, to be able to then lead us into what happens next. So essentially what we've done is we've really worked out that it's a process, not an event. We're looking for roadblocks and genuine objections. And then we're driving what I call conceptual agreement. And conceptual agreement is a term that comes from Alan Weiss, who was the $1 Million Consultant. And being on programs with Alan Weiss, this gentleman just thinks differently to so many different people in consulting. And he talks about driving conceptual agreement. What I mean by conceptual agreement is how we're trying to get people into the future to conceptually agree with what the next step is. So we're trying to get the buyer to commit to three things. 1, to buy something. 2, to do something or try something. And 3, to agree to a future contact. At the end of the day, we want to establish at the end of a meeting, and this is really fundamental, we want to establish with our buyer when, who, and why. When will we get together next? Who will be involved? And why are we getting together? Now, these are pretty fundamental questions. And if we can really determine this, we will then have a way forward with our buyer. I'm going to talk about this in terms of next meeting conversation in just a second. In determining conceptual agreement, what we are doing is we're developing great language. And if we talk about great language, we are then really testing the water with our buyer. Now, there are a whole range of different ways we can do this, but my favorite way of testing the water with a buyer is to simply ask the question is, would you be open to a conversation about? And that can be anything that you want to go and have a talk about then in terms of the next solution. Would you be open to a conversation about our next solution? Would you be open to a conversation about a meeting with the board? Would you be open to a conversation about moving ahead with a proposal? Whatever it is, would you be open to a conversation about? It's a really low threatening way of asking the question. How is this solution sounding to you? Might be another way of asking. Let's assume that I could do that. Would that be attractive to you? If you were looking to go ahead, which option would you like? These are all different ways in which we test the water with our buyer to be able to see if we can drive conceptual agreement. So when we drive conceptual agreement, what we're basically trying to do is we're trying to look to a future relationship, and we're trying to, in a low impact way, find out the person is really open to it. So in an ideal world, which option looks right to you? So looking ahead, if we were to draft up some ideas, would you have a good look at those? How about if we look at the possibility of X? In broad terms, I think we might be able to Y. If we were to put together a few options, would you have a good look at it? That we're able to meet your needs, would you then have a good look at it? So these are the things are all about conceptual agreement language. And it's a softly way for a trusted advisor to step into this idea of closing the business. So let's talk about this future contact language I was just mentioning a moment ago in terms of next meeting. Another way in which we drive the next meeting would be, well, a negative way would be, how about I check in with you in a few weeks? Now, a different way of saying that would be this: when would you like me to get back to you so we can talk further about the proposal? In other words, we're really driving an actual day and date, and it goes straight in the diary. A negative way of our proposal might be, thought I'd drop by and see how we're going with that proposal I gave you a few weeks ago. Let's do a flip on that. If we're looking at the positive way, you asked me to check back with you this week to see where you were with the proposal. That's really, really good language. Why? Because you asked me. So in other words, we're just basically, handballing it back to the buyer and saying, hey, we agreed on this. This is what you told me to do. And so I'm just basically following through. It gives us our ability to follow up in a conceptual way, conceptual agreement. Essentially, at the end of the day, we've got to ask for the business. And I said this to you before in terms of how do we actually go to ask for the business. So I want to finish today with 12 roads to yes. Not all of these are ways in which you might go ahead and ask for the business, but they are different ways in which you can ask. The first 6 are what I call trusted advisor sort of methods that I use all the time. Another 6 are different ways in which you could ask. They're not necessarily ways that I would ask every time, but they're ways that I know other people who have asked have said to me, yeah, it really works for me. So let me go through these 12 different roads with you. The first one is a recommendation close. You might simply say, well, based on what you've told me, my recommendation to you today would be to do this. It's a recommendation close. Just make a recommendation. Number 2 is good, better, best. What you essentially say here is there are 3 different ways forward, Bill. I just thought I'd give you 3 different ideas. Tell me which one sounds right to you. Number 3, the puppy dog close. Puppy dog close goes back to how puppies used to be sold many years ago in pet shop. I'm not so sure they can do this anymore, but it's all about how we take the puppy home for the weekend. The shopkeeper would say to you, hey, take the dog home for the weekend and let me know on Monday if you want to go ahead. The puppy dog close. And if you're one of the parents, of course, the poor old parent that had the kids screaming there at you, we had to then, find a way in which we weren't having to take that dog home, but essentially we were sometimes left with the dog and then take them back on the Monday. A pretty good way of actually making a closed sale. What is it? Try before you buy. Try before you buy. How about social proof close? In other words, other ways, other people that were really happy with what you did, and this is what they went ahead with in the end. So social proof, use someone else's example. A trade-off close. How about if I do this, would you do that for me? In other words, putting the person on the spot to say, if I could, would you go ahead? And the other one I was going to mention was scarcity close. I use this and certainly have at the time. And that is, when I was selling diaries, promotional products, it may have been the last particular model. It may have been the stock that was low in quantity. And I give the slide here of Krispy Kremes in terms of their ability to be able to, when they first started in the Australian market, is limited supply and have people lined up looking for Krispy Kreme donuts. And so, that's something that they were very, very good at. Now, other roads to the sale. Let me just quickly go through these with you. Assumptive close. Bill, let's just start doing the paperwork, if that's okay with you. In other words, we just start writing it up. Next one is I want your business closed. Now, the high B behavioural buyer will love this close because you basically say, hey, what would it take to get your business? First on the block close. You'd be the first one, Bill, to go ahead with this. This would be working really well with an early adopter, someone who just really, really wants to be the first person to have it. Authorization close. Why don't you just initial here, here, and here, Mary, and we'll just go ahead, authorize it. A lot better than saying sign your life away, just an authorization close. Other roads, a couple of others. This one, I think, has worked a lot for people. Sales managers close. In other words, let me just ring the sales manager now or get them involved and see if we can get that done for you. And alternate choice close. In other words, there are 2 different ways. I'd recommend this one here. So it's a combination of good, better, best, and recommendation, but you give them 2 different ways. Which one of these 2 would you like to go ahead with? Essentially, 12 different ways of saying yes. You pick what you like, but there are 6 that I recommend that I would use every day and 6 others that other people have said really work for them. Now, at the end of the day, we've talked about this idea of process, not event. We've talked about watching out for the roadblocks, driving conceptual agreement, and at the end, having to ask for the business. But the last thing I want to leave you with today is that we have to pour glue over the sale. There's no point in walking out saying, hey, the deal's done. We need to reconfirm in writing very, very quickly. And so this is where I say that sales is not a 9-to-5 job. How are you pouring glue over the deal? How do you make sure that you're getting it confirmed as quickly as possible? I really hope that today this idea of closing the business, making more business by closing it more often and more for more money is something that really helps you in terms of developing more business out there. You know, closing the sale is a fun thing. It shouldn't be seen as being this chore. It should be seen as being something that's just a lot of fun. And if we don't take it so seriously, I can tell you right now, you'll make more sales. Closing is an old word. I use it simply because so many people keep talking about closing the sale. I talk about confirming the business, to be honest with you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just simply asking someone, would you like to go ahead? Does this sound okay with you? Don't build it up to more than what it is. It is a process, not an event. Have fun with closing the sale. Hope today's been of help to you. I think if you get better at it, your conversion rate will go up, you'll make more sales, and hey, you'll be a happier, trusted advisor. Have a great day.